Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our Prey Expedition Workshop number 4. We're so glad to have you. This theme this week is microorganisms, and I'm so excited to introduce you to my friend Ann Madden. And you're not only going to get to visit with her virtually tonight, but in person in June, because Ann's coming to spend some time with us. So I thought what I'd do, Ann, is share my, give you hosting rights, if I can remember how to do this, because I just goofed, and I'll let you take it away. How's that?
Perfect. Thank you so much. So I
make host. You are now the host.
Wonderful. So let me share my desktop. And we'll keep this small. Can you see it and hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. So thank you all for giving me the treat of being with you this evening and talking about exploring secret partnerships, microbial symbiosis, and using iNaturalist. And so I am a scientist and a microbiologist, and I explore the microscopic world around us, looking at species that exist just beyond the line of sight, and figure out how we can partner with them to make the world better. But before I talk about exploring microbial symbiosis or even using iNaturalist, I wanted to take just a step back and describe how I became a scientist. Because when I was your age, I had no idea that I wanted to be a scientist at all. So up until the point of going to college, I didn't know what I wanted to be. And I didn't know any scientists. My parents weren't scientists, and my friends weren't scientists. I liked animals and I liked nature, and so I thought maybe I'll be a veterinarian. But I went off to college and I learned about science and the fact that scientists could use the scientific method and uncover new truths about our world. And so, as part of that, I decided to take an internship over the summer in the rainforest of Costa Rica and try my hand at being a scientist. And you'll find that a lot of scientists have these origin stories in the rainforest. And as soon as I entered the rainforest, I fell in love. There were species around me with beautiful colors and forms. And it's hard to explain just how big the rainforest feels. These trees are like cathedrals. They can't even be captured in one sort of scope of viewing. And the species that you think are going to be small are huge. And then the species that you think are going to be large are really small, like this tiny little blind snake that I found on my cabin floor. And don't worry, I let it go just soon after this video. So I fell in love with the rainforest and clearly always loved wearing hats. And I was shocked by what I saw around me with this lush biodiversity. Some species were dangerous, like the snakes pictured here. If they bit me, I wouldn't have made it out of the rainforest alive. Other species were incredibly sweet, like these little frogs here, where we're more of a threat to them than they are to us. And the more you look, the more you start to see how species interact with one another in the jungle. And so here's one example. This is a cecropia tree that we pulled down a branch from. And if you look close, you can see these little chambers inside the stem with these ants running through it. These plants form partnerships with ants, where the plants create a home and food for the ants, and then the ants defend the plants against any would-be caterpillar that would try and munch it. I saw species I knew little about and species I never thought I'd see in my lifetime, incredibly rare species. And I saw interactions that are hard to believe, like this spider that's eating a bat. But the research that I was working on is on these poison dart frogs, which I know other explorers have already mentioned. I was interested in finding out what they were eating because, like so many species in the rainforest, we still don't understand what they even eat, even though we know that these frogs sequester the poison from their food and ooze it out. Like many things in the rainforest, there were more mysteries and questions than there were answers, and I loved it. This was an amazing puzzle. But then I came back to college, and everything was gray and boring and mundane, and it was all lawns and dogs on leashes, and there were no mysterious creatures, there was no tropical rainforest frogs. Everything was figured out. And that's when I took a microbiology course, and I learned that what I thought I knew about the world was wrong, because around me, at a different scale, a microscopic scale, there were diverse species everywhere. Creatures that were as different from one another as a cat is from a pineapple tree. And they were living on my skin, even on the desk in front of you. Some are even living in the air. And we can't see these creatures without the aid of a microscope. But if we grow them in a lab with nutrients and in these little plates, they start to come alive as they replicate and replicate and replicate and create these piles of cells so that now we can see them. And that's when you start to see these different species come alive with different colors and forms and aromas. So one of the microbial species pictured here smells like really good cheese. And another species smells like feet. A third one smells like a bouquet of roses. These microscopic creatures were amazing to me, as different from one another as the different animals and plants I saw in the jungle. I realized that we live in an unknown jungle around us. It's just out of sight. And when we talk about microbes, we often talk about those that cause us harm, that create disease. And some microbial species do. It's why we wash our hands, and it's definitely why we wear masks. But most of these microbial species don't hurt us, and some even help us. You'll learn more later this week about some of the microbes that have beneficial partnerships with us. But needless to say, learning all this, I was convinced to be a scientist and to be a microbial explorer, or an explorer of this microscopic jungle. And so I've dedicated a lot of my life to doing research on finding out new microorganism species, where they are in the world, how they're interacting with one another. And I've also done a lot of communication and science education, whether it's in science documentaries or TED Talks. It really feels important to be an advocate for these microbial species that do so much in the world and yet don't get any credit. So I've mentioned that I'm interested in a whole bunch of different microbial species that exist in the world. But the ones I'm interested in right now, and the ones I want to focus with you about, are those involved in symbiosis. Symbiosis is a scientific word that you may have heard in classes. It describes when at least two different species live in close association with one another. All the animals and plants that are in these photographs here, they're all in symbiotic relationships with one another. Sometimes these relationships are beneficial, sometimes not so much. But whether you're familiar with the term symbiosis or not, I know you've seen examples of it in action. One example that I think we're all familiar with is that of flowering plants and bees. In this relationship, both species are benefiting. The plant's getting pollinated by the bee moving around, and the bee is getting lovely nectar and pollen for food. This is an example of a plant-animal symbiosis. Another symbiosis is one that we've already covered, that one in the jungle between that Cecropia plant and the little ants. That plant is giving shelter and really great food, and in return, the ants are fighting off, defending that plant against anything that would eat it. This is another example of a plant-animal symbiosis. But what I'm interested in are those symbiosis that involves a microbial species as one partner. I like to think of these as secret partnerships because the microbe is not always obvious. And I want to cover just a few of these examples with you. One example is no farther away than your backyard, or at least my backyard in this case, because here's a video of me going for a run and then digging up my neighbor's clover. This will be our little secret, don't tell. So if we look at this clover and we look in the roots, you start to see these nodules. And I'm about to squish it, and you'll see that they're actually pink. It's the exact same pink as my finger, so not that great in the video. This looks like sort of a normal root structure with some interesting nodule bits. but it's actually a home for millions and millions and millions of bacteria as part of a microbe-plant symbiosis. Here, the clover is giving the microbes this beautiful little bulbous home and also shuttling lots of yummy sugars to them. In return, the microbes are generating fertilizer, helping the plants grow. This is another symbiotic partnership where both species are better off together. Another example exists between animals and microbes. And here we get to talk more about the frogs that I miss so much from the rainforest. So many amphibians benefit from a secret microbial partner that lives on their skin. It's not a bad place for a microbe to live, but in return, they create a chemical shield that protects the amphibian from a deadly disease. Now, when we look at amphibians, such as salamanders or frogs, we don't see these bacteria on them. And we don't even see these microbes in the water where they also live. But if we grow them out in the lab, that's when we start to see that these special partner microbes create this beautiful, lush purple pigment that you can see pictured here. Now, this relationship is been sort of depicted in this cartoon below, where you can see the purple microbes living on this frog and helping defend them from intruding microbes that would hurt them. Now, later on, I think in a few weeks, you're going to work with Brian to collect water samples near you. And on the theme of interconnectedness, we're going to use those same water samples that you collect to later, in Yellowstone, look for the purple microbes that might be helping amphibians. So I'm not going to go into this too much now, but this is just a teaser to say that this relationship between microbes and amphibians will be something we'll talk about later. The last symbiotic relationship that I want to discuss with you is perhaps the coolest, and yet the most humble, because I'm guessing you have walked by it every day of your life and not even noticed it. Despite that, it's remarkable. The two species are interacting in a way that makes them so strong they can survive outer space. These microbial species, they're forming lichen. All right, now I can't see all of your faces, but I'm going to trust you. Who thinks that they've probably passed a lichen on a walk somewhere? Maybe on a rock where it's this leafy-like thing, maybe on tree bark. Lichens are pretty abundant, and they kind of resemble plants. But if we were to look at them under a microscope, we'd see that they're not plants at all. They're two distinct microbial species, sometimes more, working together and duplicating themselves so that there are hundreds and millions, and sometimes trillions of these individual organisms all living together. Now, the beautiful thing about this partnership is that one microbial species is doing the work of making this living castle. It's creating extra cells that make this kind of friable, leafy material. And the other species is in charge of making all the food, taking light energy and creating sugars for the community. By living together, these species can live in places that they couldn't necessarily live alone. This makes them strong because you can find lichen all over the world. You can find it in the Arctic, you can find it in the tropics. They're often called land coral. And just like you can find coral in many places of the ocean, you can find lichen in many places in the terrestrial space. They also play an important part in food webs. They're food for some animals, like reindeer. One of my favorite things about lichen is that hummingbirds will collect them and then use them to make a waterproof nest. So we've got microbial symbiosis and then another animal also in close association with these creatures. Lichens have a lot of mystery to them. Some of them fluoresce under UV light, and we're still not even sure why. And some of them, a little bit of water, will slightly shift their color. But I really think that they are remarkable creatures because by living together, they can inhabit spaces like open-faced rocks that are being pounded by UV sun radiation that go very dry like a desert for a long period of time. And yet they can flourish where nothing else can. They're so good at dealing with stress that scientists brought them up into space, showed them the vacuum of space with all the cosmic radiation, brought them back home, and the lichen continued to grow. Clearly, these microbial species are stronger together. If you were to take a microscopic view of lichen, you'd start to see that this isn't a plant. This is definitely two microbial species. You can see that green network of one species, and then those blue balls. Those are the other microbial species, the ones in charge of making food. Now that you've learned about lichen, you have an activity before you. You will be practicing your observation skills by exploring the microbial world near you. And you're going to do 3 relatively simple things that we're about to go over in more detail. 1, you're going to hunt for a microbial symbiosis, a lichen in your own neighborhood or yard or anywhere it's safe for you to travel to. 2, you're going to observe that lichen by photographing it. Really look at its nook and crannies, see what its colors and shapes are. 3, you're going to share your observation with other scientists as part of a digital global research journal by uploading your photo to the iNaturalist app. It's kind of like doing the observations that you're already doing in your notebooks, but sharing it with the world. Okay, so there's some photos of lichens around here, but we should go over the first step, finding the lichen. Already talked about lichens being so many places in our world, but I wanted to give you some more examples. These are lichens on stone walls, and this is in my dad's paved yard, so sometimes lichens are really easy to find. While some of them look like they're painted rocks, others can kind of grow prickly, and those others look like beards. You can find them on bark or on fence posts. Sometimes you can also find them on human-created things like this stop sign. These lichens look pretty happy. Or how about these? They're in the crannies and crevices of a stone lion near my house. Now, sometimes when people are hunting lichen, they find moss. Moss, in many ways, resembles lichen, but it's not lichen. It's not microscopic creatures. It's a plant. So, one of the challenges you're going to face is determining whether what you're seeing is a lichen or a moss. To do that, you're going to rely on your senses. Investigate texture. Lichen will often feel dry or springy when wet. Moss will often feel moist, very soft, and though it can dry out, if you were to add a bunch of water, it'll soak up all the water like a sponge. Sometimes the colors are a hint. While moss is often that brown or green, lichen can be green, blue. My favorite is definitely pink. It's beautiful. It's called Christmas wreath lichen. And there's also yellow and orange. Also, look to the habitats. What are you noticing around your lichen or moss? Often moss will be in places that are more moist most of the time, while lichen will be in those spaces that are hard for anything else to survive. And I just wanted to take a second and show you this video of lichen because look how huge it is. How many microscopic creatures are all living together to create a handful of life? It's pretty remarkable when you think about it. So here's just another guide thinking about what's moss and what's a lichen. See in that corner, that lichen that kind of looks like reptile skin? I think that's pretty cool. And here's a little fairy house near my house where you can see the moss, that plant that's making the carpet, and then the nice lichen that's on the roof. This is the time where I find it really important for me to introduce my cat, Puffin. Sadly, her name is not Penguin, but she is named after the bird that she kind of looks like. Puffin is a great lichen hunter. You can see under her paws, she's got 2 little lichens, and then there's another 3rd yellow lichen under my finger. So if Puffin can find the lichens, I'm very sure you all can. And maybe, just maybe, you'll be lucky enough to see a hummingbird's nest made out of lichen. I've seen one in my life, and it's adorable. Okay, so now that you've done all the hard work of finding that lichen near you, you're going to take a photo of it. I trust you know how to take a beautiful photo and capture nature. The third part that you're going to do is share this image on the app iNaturalist. So this is an app that does 2 things particularly well. 1, it helps people identify and categorize species by looking at the image and saying what it might be. Maybe it's a domestic cat or a pine tree. But what I think the app is really remarkable for is it serves as a global digital notebook. It allows people to their observations across the world as part of a living record of life on Earth. Scientists can then comb through these entries and observations to understand where species are distributed and even what new species may exist. This type of science, where non-scientists or amateur scientists or parents, or students or neighbors are helping scientists with the collection of data, samples, observations, or even help with analysis, this is called citizen science or participatory science. And we're going to talk more about it at Yellowstone. Okay, so here are the nitty-gritty details of using the iNaturalist app. It's really pretty simple, and I know of all the remarkable things that you've done that you can do this with great ease. Basically, you are going to create an account on iNaturalist and then click Observe. The next thing you are going to do is upload that photo that you have of that lichen. You'll do this by clicking Photo Library and then clicking Add. There we go. Your photo is now uploaded and it should populate with the location and date you observed it. You can just check it to make sure that it's true. Here's the sort of fun part. You're going to select the ID by clicking What did you see? Use suggestions. Sometimes iNaturalist is spot on. It does a great job. It will show you, Puffin, that's domestic cat. Other times, it doesn't have high confidence. And so in that case, if you see that it's not confident about what its suggested species matches are, you're just going to type fungi, including lichens. You're giving it that important tag that shows others you're pretty confident it's lichen. The last thing you're going to do is click on the notes and add any extra observations you have. Think about where you saw the lichen. Was it on a stone wall or a tree? What did it feel like? Were there any insects crawling on it? This is the part where you get to share information that might be relevant to future scientists. Now I'm also giving you the directions here for a browser-based, non-mobile upload of the photos, in case you're not using your phone. You can come back to this if there are helpful directions for you later. Once you've successfully uploaded your photo of a lichen, you can peruse what other people have uploaded for different lichens near you. Each one of these images was taken by someone who observed the lichen, photographed it, and uploaded it, all from the geographic region that's closest to you. Now's a great time to play around with iNaturalist. See how it works for plants in your backyard and other species. I also want to say congratulations preemptively, because by the time you have found the lichen and gone on this hunt, you are officially a microbial explorer. You have gone out into the world without a microscope and still found visual evidence of microbial species. I also have some links at the bottom here, just in case you run into any questions about needing a little bit more information about lichens or a little bit of information more about iNaturalist. Also, don't panic if you don't think that you were able to capture an image of a lichen. It's really important that you're learning to observe nature and think at a different scale. And we'll find more lichen in Yellowstone. I want to thank you all for your incredible attention, because I know that was a lot of information. We went through a journey that started with the jungle, where we learned that their jungle is filled with species that we don't fully understand yet. But we also learned that wherever we are, even when we're at home, we are surrounded by a microscopic jungle of unknown species everywhere, and many of these species help us. We even learned that some of these microscopic species form symbiotic relationships or partnerships with other species. And you are going to uncover a microbial symbiosis, a lichen near you, a remarkable creature that's actually a combination of creatures that are good at fending off stress. You're going to photograph it, share it on a global digital research notebook, and help scientists in the future learn more about our world. And above and beyond all of that, I hope you are really excited about Yellowstone, and we will have many more microbial adventures together. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Wow, everybody should unmute and clap, 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 clap. That was awesome. Wow.
Thank you.
Oh, Anne, that was wonderful. Okay, If you have questions about how to use iNaturalist, this is what I would propose. Try it in the next 2 days. On Friday, I'm going to have a lunch meeting with 5th and 6th grade because Rosa's presentation tomorrow, she's going to give you some scientific materials that you need to carry out her assignment, and I'm going to pass them out on Friday. So if you have questions about iNaturalist, then Friday we can have a little update on that, all right? If you have questions about anything else that Anne mentioned, unmute yourself and ask her right now.
So, I was wondering about iNaturalist. So, does it cost money?
It is not. It's absolutely free. This is not me trying to sell you anything.
Is the entire world going to know my first and last name?
That's such a great question. I absolutely recommend that you create a name that's not your first and last name.
Okay.
And when you do
If you
that,
have other questions with this, I'm sure that there is a parent or guardian who will give you great advice on how to fill out that information just about when you first set up that initial account.
yeah. Anybody else have a question? Raise those hands. I just wanted to tell you a little story that I learned about iNaturalist when I was at a conference in Washington, D.C. with National Geographic. So they were telling a story about someone who was really fond of using iNaturalist, and I'm kind of addicted myself, actually. And they were sitting at a cafe in a big city. I wished I had taken better notes in my field journal and can tell you the name of the city. I know it wasn't Chicago, but it was big city like that. They were sitting in an outdoor cafe and they saw this little beetle on this plant. And they hadn't seen that kind of beetle before. So they whipped out their phone and they took a picture. They uploaded it to iNaturalist and put unidentified beetle, and they put the location of where they found it. Then, scientists in the United Kingdom identified it. Scientists from all over the world love to help people identify their unidentified objects on there. And this scientist said, this is an invasive species. You definitely need to let the authorities know so this doesn't take over the crops in your area. So it is citizen science. It's so cool that way. Another thing I wanted to show really fast for those of you who were working with, could you, I can't remember. Did you share back the screen with me, Anne?
I think so.
Let's see where host disabled participating screen sharing. Oh, I disabled screen. Yeah, you did, and I disabled it. I'll show you on Friday. I found a whole bunch of lichen around the Teton River, clear up from the Teton Dam site down to the confluence where the Teton River connects with the Henry's Fork. So that was really fun last year when we were studying about the Teton River. It was just amazing. So students,
I love that.
Go ahead. Students, we are going to be doing your recording on a digital field journal, like Anne said, in iNaturalist. What I'd like you to do in your field journals, can you guys hold those up for a minute? Anyone have their field journal tonight? Awesome. In your field journal, I'd just like you to write a sentence or a paragraph about your experience, about where you found your lichen, how did you tell it was lichen and not moss, and if you uploaded it to iNaturalist, did somebody identify specifically what kind of lichen it was? So just write a little entry in there. And then Walter and the rest of you who are saying you weren't going to put your first and last name in iNaturalist, which is really smart, write down your iNaturalist name so that I can look for you in iNaturalist. All right? My iNaturalist name is Cherie Barton, but I know you guys are going to choose something else. And it might be something like a Delhi penguin, right? So we'll see. Oh, and this has been amazing. Thank you so very much. We have really appreciated having you here tonight. And wow, I learned so much. I love this. So thank you, and we will see you in a few weeks in Yellowstone.
Super excited to meet you all in person. Can't wait. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. This was the best meeting.